morning. Welcome all of you here today. I see your smiling faces here. Welcome to our people online. And if you're just joining us for the first time this morning, this is Arrowhead Messianic congregation. We're located in Peoria, Arizona. And this is our Shabbat morning Bible study. Today is the second day of the month of Sivan, biblical year 5784. That is June 8th, 2024, on the Gregorian calendar, and I'm Pastor Greg White. And if you're watching online, if you like what you hear and you're watching from the MyAMCmediagroup website, there's a click here to give link button. It's on the home page, MyAMC.org. It's right at the third row from the top of the page, located right in the middle. And there's also a donate button in the lower right there, so you can't miss it. If you're watching from the YouTube channel, there's an area in the live stream channel. There's a continuation button at the bottom of the screen. And you can also click here to give. So we're going to pick up today in Mark, Gospel of Mark, chapter 5. I'm going to pick it up in verse 25. And we're going to be continuing on today with the parables of the Master and the demonstration, in particular of Yeshua's authority. So this is also one of the events we have during the year. This is a day of healing. We're going to have a healing service so this entire day. From a lot of the teachings this morning through the service is about healing. This is a day of healing. So take heed and take note of what you're hearing today. Because we're going to be talking most of the day about healing, the principles behind healing, what works, what doesn't work, things you should be doing, things you shouldn't be doing, so things like that. But let's open in prayer. Father God, we come to you today. This is a day we get to celebrate you. Thank you for this new month. And we ask that you arm us this morning with the full armor of God as we go about seeking the truths of your word, particularly when it comes to healing. So we ask you to give us the girdle of truth, the breastplate of righteousness, shoes of peace, helmet of salvation, the shield of faith, right? We need the shield of faith to deflect Satan's fiery darts of doubt, denial, and deceit today. But we ask especially, Lord, that you give us the two-edged sword of your word, that we're able to dig deep and go on the offense against the enemy, as well as use it defensively. So we ask these things today in Yeshua, Jesus' name. Amen. So as we pick up today, we're going to be picking up today in this fifth chapter. For people who are joining us online, we're in the Gospel of Mark, a little bit of an introduction. If you look in Revelation chapter 4, in verse 7, there's a description there of the cherubim around God's throne as being these four faces. The four faces of a lion, an ox, a man, and an eagle. So what's the significance of the number 4 in the Bible, right? So we've got these four faces of God. We see this number 4 reflected in our seasons. We have 4 seasons. We have 4 directions. So the number 4 in the Bible is normally depicted as a sign of wholesomeness and completeness. So keep that in mind as we go through this today. So In Revelation chapter 4, verse 7, we see one of these four faces being depicted as an ox. And that's how the Gospel of Mark is depicted. By tradition, the church has attributed each of these four faces according to the character and message of a particular gospel. So when you're in Europe, particularly, if you're in Italy, Germany, and you go through these cathedrals and these churches, you'll see some of these paintings, these carvings even, and they depict each of these creatures typically to represent some type of book. So again, the Gospel of Mark associated with the ox. And why? Because the Gospel of Mark shows Yeshua, Jesus, as a servant, just as an ox is an animal of work and service. He's shown more as a servant of the Lord and a workman. So as we get into this book, and we've already seen it for people who have been with us for a while, you're seeing the stark difference in the book of Mark versus the other three Gospels. Fast moving, event to event to event, very, very little discourse. It's a maximum of the Yeshua moving from event to event to event. And we see this word particularly being used in this gospel more than any of the other gospels. This word immediately, right? Immediately he was here, immediately he went there. So the Greek word euthos, depending on its usage, occurs more than 40 times in this Gospel of Mark. And like I'm just saying, we see him as a servant, moving from place to place. The other thing that's unique about this gospel, a lot of tradition, a lot of research being done, a lot of commentaries mention the Apostle Peter actually as being the main source of the writings of this gospel. And remember, Mark was not one of the original 12 disciples. He was a young man. He was called into ministry, very young age, probably 15 or 16, and he needed some help. So that's how the Lord arranged it. So, but he is also referred to, by many people refer to him as John Mark. John Mark. So Peter and Mark got along very well. He's referred to in the book of 1 Peter, chapter 5, verse 13. And in the beginning, he really didn't do so well. He, falling out with Paul, he was called back. But he was restored. Just as like Peter was restored after denying Yeshua 3 times. So maybe there was some similarities in personality, maybe empathy, compassion for each other. But both Peter and John Mark were restored in the end. Another indication that Peter wrote this, if we look at the books of Peter, we see a writing style there. There's a lot of vivid eyewitness detail in this gospel, just as we see in the first and second books of Peter. And as a matter of fact, there's a lot of striking detail that's not even in any of the other gospels. We'll get into some of that today. It isn't like in chapter 6, verse 39, he doesn't just mention the grass, he mentioned there was green grass. Chapter 5, verse 13, we saw this mentioning of there were these 2,000 hogs. So I don't know if Peter and Mark were counting, but they saw significance in counting the exact number. So it's full of life, it's full of vivid details, and so as you go through this as a reader, studier of God's Word, picture yourself as a reporter, so to speak, a modern day reporter, maybe with a camera and following Yeshua from event to event, and you're writing down some of the things you've seen. Many people believe, according to church tradition, that this was the first of the 4 Gospels written. Good reason for that. It was written very early, probably around 48 to 50 AD. And again, we have to remember that John Mark was not one of the original 12 disciples. And the only mention we see of him is in Mark chapter 14, verses 51 and 52. And it may have been actually Peter who mentions him, even though the author is Mark. We have to remember that Peter may have been scripting some of this stuff as he's moving from event to event. It does make sense, because as these apostles had to follow Yeshua. And so Peter was one of these apostles, so it may have very well been that when Yeshua was moving from these events to events and he had his apostles behind him, that Mark was maybe right there with Peter. Kind of like maybe Peter was mentoring him. So that's the picture that you have to get of how this gospel, a pretty awesome, actually, eyewitness account, very, very different than the other 3 accounts of the gospel by the other 3 disciples. Most likely, Mark was part of a larger group that followed Yeshua. Remember, there was the apostles, and there were other groups that followed Yeshua. Well, we do know this, that the early church met at the home of John Mark's mother Mary, and that was in Jerusalem. We see that in Acts 12, verse 12. And we also know that this gospel, in terms of its penning and gathering all of the notes and manuscripts, was primarily written to a Greek audience, and it was primarily written in Rome. And so why was that? Well, we know that in this gospel we see more Latin words being used than any of the other gospels. We see some phrases that aren't in the other gospels. We see centurio, chapter 15, verse 39, the use of the word quadrans, chapter 12, verse 49, flagellare, chapter 15, verse 15, speculator, chapter 6, verse 27, which we get the English words, speculator, chapter 6, verse 27, which we get the English word speculator. A speculative person is somebody who is not convinced, who is skeptical. There's where we get our word skeptical. We see the use of the word in chapter 12, verse 14, the word census. Sextarius in chapter 7, verse 4, something to do with the number 6. Praetorium, chapter 15, verse 6. So these are some of the Latin words we see only in the Gospel of Mark. And we know from church tradition and from the history of evangelism throughout the world that when missionaries go to a people, that have never heard the scriptures before in their own language, they usually begin by translating the Gospel of Mark, right? We need to bring the word to people. It's a short gospel. It's the most translated book in the entire world. One reason is that it's the shortest gospel, but another reason is that this gospel was written for people. This is important. If you're unfamiliar with first century Judaism, this is the book that you would want to read and really get a good, absorption of the word without maybe being having to know or have knowledge of the traditions of Judaism. So again, Mark wrote this gospel primarily for Gentiles, and specifically there's evidence that this was written to the Romans in Rome. So we're going to pick it up today in chapter 5, verse 16 today. So we're going to continue on with healing, all right? So let's pick it up there in chapter 5, verse 25. And this particular passage is pretty significant, right? So definitely related to what we're going to hear today, some of the other messages today. So again, chapter 5, verse 25. And a certain woman which had an issue of blood 12 years, and had suffered many things of many physicians, and had spent all that she had, and was nothing better, or wasn't getting any better, but in fact was getting worse. When she heard about Yeshua, she came, it's just interesting, she came behind him in the crowd and touched his garment. For she said, if only I may touch his clothes, I shall be made well. And then we see immediately the fountain of her blood was dried up, and she felt in her body that she was healed of the affliction. And Jesus, immediately knowing in him and himself that power had gone out of him, turned around in the crowd and said, who touched my clothes? Right? There's a whole bunch of commentaries written about this in various forms, about whether, in fact, this woman touched him or touched his clothes. But I'm going to go with what it said here. Who touched my clothes? You notice he didn't say, who touched me? Who touched my clothes? But his disciples said to him, you see the multitude thronging you, and you say, who touched me? So the controversy comes as to, remember, the disciples are asking him, who touched me? And he didn't say that somebody touched him. They said, somebody touched my clothes. So right off the bat, we're getting a little off course here. And he looked around to see who had done this thing. But the woman, fearing and trembling, knowing what had happened to her, came and fell down before him and told him the whole truth. And he said to her, daughter, your faith has made you well. Go in peace and be healed of your affliction. So the point here being is, regardless of whether the woman touched his clothes or whether the woman touched him, it didn't matter, right? It didn't matter. It was her faith that healed her. It wasn't the fact that she touched his clothes or even touched him. She went to him and had faith that she was going to make contact with him and that she was going to be healed. So we're going to talk a little bit more about that today. You have to remember, this woman was in a desperate condition. This is a condition that made her ceremonially and socially unclean. So she couldn't go about doing her normal business as a normal citizen. And this was a significant burden. Remember, she had been living under this for 12 years right now. And so if we go back to the Jewish traditions of the time, if this woman touched anyone, she made him or her ceremonial unclean. That was what the Jewish people believed. And when that happened, this uncleanness did not allow them to take part in any aspect of Jewish worship. We see that, right? We see that in Leviticus 15, 19 through 31. This was the laws that God gave to the Jewish people. G. Campbell Morgan made a really good comment on this. By the very law of her people, by the very law of her own people, she was divorced from her husband. Can you imagine that? Divorced from her husband and could not live in her home. She was ostracized from all society and must not come in contact with her old friends. She was excommunicated from the services of the synagogue and thus shut out from the women's courts in the temple. So I would say this woman was in a very desperate situation. But then we see the plight of her situation even more. She had suffered many things from many physicians. She went to the doctors to get better, but only suffered worse. So I'm not going to say this was a poor woman, but it could have been a situation where she had a husband, maybe a very loving husband, and maybe the husband was the one who was paying for her to go to all these doctors or doing whatever she needed to do. But it wasn't getting any better for her. It was getting worse, and these treatments, whatever they were causing this family to become poor. And we see this same passage in Luke 8:43. So Luke was a physician, so he knew all about this. So he tells us that she had spent her entire livelihood, every penny that she had, on these physicians. So, think about it. Doctor bills were taking all the money that this family had. So we go back and look at some of the things perhaps that they were doing. I'll just spend a little time on this because I think just of all the parables that I've gone through, this one is particularly interesting because we look at some of the different ways that some of these physicians went about doing some of these healings. Different formulas, so to speak. One of them was they took the gum Alexandria. They took some gum, I don't know what that is, some kind of a plant probably, alum, another plant called Quercus hortensis, the weight of a zuzi each, let them be bruised together and given in wine to the woman that had an issue of blood. They always, it's interesting. There's always something here. If it fails, it says this. But if it fail, take of Persian onions 9 logs. I think those are probably maybe certain kinds of onions. Take of Persian onions 9 logs, boil them in wine, and let somebody come behind and affright her and say, "Arise from thy flux." So they had all kinds of things to fix these things. So, and then we see this passage, suffer many things from many physicians. So this just wasn't one person, there was a number of them that she went through. Imagine the money or the livelihood that she had to spend in this situation. There's a good comment here from, another comment from G. Campbell Morgan. This is interesting. They may pay a visit to Dr. Success, but he's no help in the long run. Dr. Pleasure, Dr. Self-Help, or Dr. Religion can't bring a real cure. Only Dr. Jesus can, right? So we know that from a fact. And then there's this, it says, if only I may touch his clothes, I shall be made well. Because this woman's condition was embarrassing and because she was ceremonial unclean and would be condemned, all right? So there's more evidence here. There's a whole section on this, various commentaries on this particular passage. That because she was ceremonial unclean and would be condemned for touching Jesus or even being in a pressing crowd, she wanted to do this secretly. So maybe there's a lot of conjecture that she was trying to do this behind the scenes. She snuck in. They didn't even see her coming. And she would not openly ask Yeshua to be healed, but she thought, if only I can touch his clothes, I should be made well. So this is a unique situation. Many times when Yeshua healed people, he looked them right in the eye, he addressed them. There was face-to-face contact, but not in this one. This one is unique in its own right. And another comment I was reading this week, this is interesting, since we have no evidence in the Bible that Yeshua healed this way before. And that's true. Up to this point, we don't have him healing in any of this way before. It would seem potentially that the woman acted at least partially on superstition, right? If only I could touch his clothes, right? Or, So the question was, did her faith have an element of error and superstition? But we see that later on, that Yeshua was, when he felt the power go out, he told her that your faith was going to heal her. We could do a whole discussion on this. There are many things we could find wrong with this woman's faith, right? Was it partial faith? Was it, was she all in? Nevertheless, her faith was in Yeshua, and the object of faith is much more important than the quality, right? We see that. The object of the faith is much more important than the quality of the faith. And we have to remember this. There was no magic. I'll use the word magic. There was no magic in the garments of Yeshua. Right. There's no magic there. Perhaps it was superstition in the woman's mind, but our Lord in his grace and his mercy honored her darkened faith, as in the case of Peter's shadow. Remember that. Remember the situation where Peter's shadow and Paul's handkerchief, that's mentioned. That's another instance of that. Here we have Peter and Paul, two of his disciples, and they're looking at the shadow. Well, the shadow's going to heal. So we have to be careful that we don't get off track. We're going to talk about that today, particularly in the portion in the healing that I'm going to talk about today. Matthew 9:20 says, she touched the hem of his garment. And that actually means one of the borders of the outer garments that all the Jewish people wore. And we know this, that every devout Jewish person wore an outer robe with 4 tassels on it, one at each corner, and these tassels were worn in obedience to the command. Right? We see the command in Numbers 15, 38 through 40. And they were to signify to others and to remind the man himself that the wearer was a member of the chosen people of God. Right? So that was when Yeshua was walking as part of his authority. And so what do we see in here also? Again, there's that word immediately. And immediately the fountain of her blood was dried up. And so according to the thinking of the day, when this unclean woman touched Yeshua, it would make him unclean, right? There's another reason why maybe she didn't touch him. But because of the nature of Yeshua and the power of God, that wasn't how it worked. When she touched his garment, Yeshua was not made unclean, right? The woman was made whole, exact opposite. When we come to Yeshua with our sin and lay it upon him, it doesn't make him a sinner, but it makes us clean. He already paid that price once. We don't re-crucify the Lord every time we go to him and confess our sins, right? He's done it once, it's done. It's a done deal. And again, this is an amazing story. It says, she felt in her body that she was healed of the affliction. Immediately, knowing in himself that power had gone out of him. When the woman was healed, both the woman and Yeshua knew what happened. It wasn't Yeshua knew one thing and the woman, they both understood what happened. She felt in her body that it happened, and Yeshua felt that power had gone out of him. Right? I was looking at some of the commentaries this week. You know, it's interesting to know here's a question. Maybe I'll open this up. What kind of power do you think went out of him? What specific power do you think went out of him? I mean, was it his healing power? Was it his ability to forgive sins? What power went out of him? That's an interesting. Okay, we have a comment here. He felt his healing power come out of him. Exactly what that is, we'll never know in this life. And so, as we go through this, there's a lot. There's a lot to consider here. And this is interesting. This is the only miracle that we see in God's Word where it mentions the idea that power went out of him. It's the only miracle. None of the other miracles are like that. Right? Matter of fact, most of the other miracles, he's unaffected. Right? Person's healed, and Yeshua just goes on with his business. Yes, go ahead. Would you go up to the mic? So it's pretty fascinating account. You do a deep dive into it.
The reason why he felt the power come out of his body was because he wasn't expecting it. Usually all the healings that he does, he knows. And so the power in him is already there. But he was walking when this woman came and touched his garment.
Touched his garment, yeah.
And he was taken aback because of that.
Yeah.
That's what I believe anyway.
Well, there's potentially some truth to that, but do remember this: we have Yeshua walking as God and man, right? So he had knowledge. He had knowledge, and he had perception that we didn't know. The interesting thing was at that particular moment, did the Father choose to just shut that off from him, for him not to be aware that this woman came up to him? Because we know, right, he was reading minds in the beginning. So he had moments where he had tremendous insight, tremendous wisdom of all things that were going on. But at this particular moment, right, you can say he didn't know what was going on. It's a fascinating story. It's yeah, maybe shut off the God part and turn on the human part, you know, or he did know but wasn't able maybe to communicate. I don't know.
I think that there's a possibility that out of her desperation, 12 years is a long time to have
Yeah.
any kind of condition.
Right.
12 years, she suffered with this thing daily.
Right.
She had to have heard about him.
Right.
And she had to have heard about the miracles that had been done. I think that she really got to a point in her heart that she said, look, I have tried everything else. I don't have anything else that I can try.
Right.
He's healed so many people. If I can just get through the crowd close enough to him to touch even his clothes,
Right.
it's going to make the difference in my life. I think that that was her faith, reaching out, because the odds were if you had some kind of issue and you were unclean, you weren't in public. That would be a
Right.
no-no.
Yeah.
So even though she knew in her heart that she had this issue going on, against all odds, she was going to reach out and touch him, even if it meant, you know, she was going to get in trouble. Because at this point, desperation has a sound.
Right.
It's beyond anything else. I'm not going to stop until I get there. I'm not going to stop until I touch him. I'm going to touch him, and I'm going to be okay. He's going to make everything all right. I believe she really felt that in her heart. And the love that she got from him was so filled with compassion
Yeah.
that when she touched the hem of his garment, he felt that desperation through his clothes,
Yeah.
that something immediately has just happened. A miracle has taken place because this woman was in deep need.
Yes.
I don't know if you've ever been in deep need that you're going to risk everything you got for this one thing. And I just think that was the faith that he was talking about, the faith to go out into the crowd knowing you got this issue and knowing that it's not allowed, and knowing that back in them days, well, they would stone you quick for the things that you did wrong. So it was a life-changing experience that she was willing to take, and even if she died trying, she'd made up in her mind that she's going to touch him because she's heard. And she knew of all the things that she heard. He's raising the dead. Come on, really? I got this
Right.
issue. Nobody's fixing it. The doctors can't do anything. They've already told me that I'm in stage whatever, and there's no help coming. I need this, and I'm willing to do whatever I need to do to get there. And nobody's going to
Yes.
stop me from making that connection. We come into this world connected to somebody. Connection is our normal way of life. God made it that we come into the world connected to someone. The way that a child is conceived is through a physical connection.
Right.
So connection is important. I believe she knew that when I touch him, it's going to be over.
Yeah. Yeah, your comment actually provoked a whole bunch of things. So this is how I perceive what happened. I do believe that she had a tremendous amount of faith, but it wasn't that she had faith that Yeshua was going to heal her. Period. That's all she really needed at the moment. But the questions I had was, I mean, did she come here, did she come prepared? You know, was she, if she was a Jewish woman and had had this for 12 years, you know, did she, if she came there and believed that he was going to heal her, did she prepare, right? What was her preparation for coming there? Did she fast? I mean, think about fasting and prayer, right? Yeshua said, some things cannot be healed except fasting and prayer. So did she come there prepared, really, really ready? Because there was so much desperation on her part. So maybe she was thinking, this is my last chance, and I have got to give it my all. So when she heard about Yeshua, she had enough time maybe to prepare for 7-day, 12-day, who knows how long of a fast. So if she came there, think about this, if she came there fasting, and her faith was just ready, if I can just touch this garment. And maybe at that moment, there's so many things that kind of go through my mind. Maybe God the Father just says, this woman is really, really ready for this. But this is going to be a healing like you've never seen before. So I'm going to have to do something really different here, my son. I'm just going to let her come to you in a surprise mode. Because when she touches your garment, she is going to need such a dramatic healing that it's going to take something out of you. It's going to pull from you because that's what she needs. That's the only way she is going to be healed. That's what I think it was something like that. I think maybe she came, she was prepared, and when he said power went out of me, I think it was a number of things. I think the healing power, some of the healing power of Yeshua came out of him. Some of the love that he had for her just came and just flowed into her body, into her spirit. This man loves me. This man is God. He is sovereign over everything. So the sovereignty of the Lord, the omniscience of the Lord, maybe all of the attributes, maybe a piece of all the attributes flowed into this woman all at once to bring about this most powerful healing. It was something different. It had to be so profound because it had gone on so long that something needed to come out, and there needed to be a giving and a receiving, and it was complete. That's how I look at it. Something very, very unique, dramatic, and like no other healing again, like we've seen in the Bible. So, we're having a healing service today. This is, how many people came here, fasting for, let's say 10 days, right? Let's say that. If this woman came and she had, fasted and came prepared to just touch his garment, then that's a reminder to us that if we come prepared, when there's a healing event or whatever it is, maybe we'll see something different. I truly believe this. Person that I really talks about this event the most when it comes to the things that are involved with science and things is Jensen Franklin. Jensen Franklin constantly brings this particular parable up in a lot of his healing ministries when it comes to fasting and prayer. Fasting and prayer.
But he seems surprised.
Huh, what's that?
I think she was surprised.
Okay, it's a good comment. My sister says the woman seemed surprised.
Yeah.
Seemed
Because he
surprised.
said he touched you.
Yeah,
So I don't think she grabbed his clothes and held on tight. I think she just barely touched him.
yeah,
And then, whoa, he said, who touched me?
yeah,
And all these people.
yeah. Yeah, so, but we do know that Yeshua said to her later, your faith has healed you. Now, was it the faith to fast, to prepare, to come here, and to just believe that if I can just touch his garment, I will be completely healed? Was that the total summation of her faith right now? I don't have to hold on to the thing while he's walking for 5 minutes. I just need to touch it for a fraction of a second, like less than a second maybe. But yeah, so to speak to what you're saying, she could have been just surprised that it happened so quick. And that I think if she was surprised, it was the surprise part, like, boy, I really felt bad. And I can't, have you ever had that happen where I haven't? I don't think I've felt bad. We've all felt bad. And then somebody gave us something, but it, usually took, some time, and we feel better. And sometimes we're feeling completely better, but this was dramatic. This happened within, I think, seconds. And that, maybe the surprise part says, it's like somebody giving you, like a shock or something, like, what just happened? I have no idea what happened. But I recognize something's changed, and I'm feeling pretty good. You have a comment? No? Okay. So, a lot of things in this that, we could spend a lot of time, but I think it's important since we're, this is a healing service. I think we need to cover every aspect of this because this is really pertinent to today. Yes.
I just wanted to say, I am going to be talking a little bit about the woman with the issue of blood
Awesome.
today. So something we can, I'll just save it for then.
Okay.
Okay.
All right. And then he says, and he looked around to her to see her who had done this thing. So this was before she revealed herself. Jesus knew all along exactly who touched him and received the healing. So he knew that, but he asked, "Who touched my clothes?" Why did he do that? Any comment about that? So he knew that. But he didn't know who the person was. And when he said, "Who touched my clothes?" The disciples were amazed that Yeshua asked this question. Given the situation, his disciples said to him, "You see the multitude thronging you, and you say, 'Who touched me?'" Right? Well, they're probably asking him, like, "Don't you know?" Right?
He may have known.
But I think what happened was the disciples probably didn't understand the difference between casual contact with Yeshua and reaching out to touch him in faith. I think that was maybe the difference there. They didn't quite get that. You can imagine someone, because of the press of the crowd, bumped up against Yeshua, right? Somebody bumps up against them, doesn't have any faith. It's just a bump, right? Right. But when this woman's miracle was revealed, they might say, I bumped into Jesus, I touched him, yet I was not healed. But there's a huge difference between bumping into Yeshua and reaching out to touch him in faith. You can come, this is a perfect example, you can come to a congregation each week after week after week, right? And we can bump into Yeshua. Maybe some of us come here, we're not even prepared, but we just bump into him. Right? We just bump into him, but we're not healed. That's not the same as reaching out and touching him in faith. We've got a number of weeks to prepare for today. We don't do these we don't do them frequently, but we do them with enough warning to let people know that, yes, go ahead.
Grandma has, watching, she
Yes.
has a question. She said, why could the physicians not heal her? And did he not know the answer? How did Yeshua respond to the lady? Luke chapter 8, verse 43, nothing that the women's problem was incurable. How have any of you have been sick for 12 years? The number 12, 12 disciples, 12 tribes. What can we learn from this?
Right, so let me just reiterate what the question was. In Luke 8, so the physician Luke is saying that nothing was incurable. Was that the context? Okay, so the physician was saying that this was not something that was incurable. What? The women's problem. So the question is, why weren't the physicians able to heal this particular problem? When I think about that, with diseases sometimes they can be, I'm not going to say misdiagnosed, but we don't have all the answers to something. There are diseases out there right now, we know from modern medicine, that a simple, certain kind of a flour or a certain kind of an oil or a certain kind of thing given to somebody with a specific thing just fixes it, right? And we didn't even know, right? But maybe in the process of, later on, that we say, oh, it's because this particular, if this did it, why didn't the other ones do it? And then they analyze, let me go down and this particular oil worked. Oh, that's what the problem was. And as a result of finding, this is what a lot of the principles in modern medicine are based on. We find it, and then we go back later on, and we say, oh, it wasn't this after all, it was this.
They hadn't discovered vitamin K2 yet. Which does help with blood coagulation.
Yeah, could have been a blood coagulation issue, vitamin K2. And I'm thinking, I know a couple of things now that may not have been available there. I think there's a green lettuce out there, not kale, it's like kale. There's kale, collard greens, and there's another one. And that particular one, the other one I'm trying to think of, is very, very rich in vitamin K. It's a particularly very, very rich kind of a lettuce. Maybe it wasn't available at the time, I don't know, but could have been a situation where it was just they didn't have all the answers back then, or it could have been a situation where, and we have to consider this. The Lord numbers our days, right? Maybe the Lord allowed these 12 years to go on in her life just for this divine appointment, right? Maybe it was, think about this, had she been healed years before, she may not have had no need in her own mind to come and meet the Messiah. Yeah, Richard. Yeah. So that's how we have to look at some of our healings right now. Go back to faith and healing. Maybe there's a divine appointment for us that's awaiting us. Do we have faith We have to believe this. If we're not going to be healed in this life, we're going to be healed in that life. So no matter what, we're going to get healed. But do we believe that? But, the human part of us wants us to be healed right now so that we can go on with our life, so that we can be more productive for the Lord, so that we can do kingdom business, and that we could have more rewards, right? That's where our mind goes, right? And that's biblical, right? If I could do this, I could help more people, but I can't do this. But, and that's part of, understanding. We talked about this some months ago, about understanding the incomprehensibility of God and his plan for us sometimes. Sometimes we don't know all the plans, but the common denominator in all this is faith. No matter what, Lord, I'm going on. If I'm not going to be healed today, I'm not going to be healed next week, I'm going to be healed down the road. So, Lord, use me where I am right now, and let me do the best I can with what I have right now. And honestly, if you're in a situation where you have a physical ailment or something, and you're just trusting the Lord, and you're doing the Lord's work with what you have, you already have favor with the Lord in terms of your rewards in heaven. Because there are people that can't do that. There are a lot of people out there who believe, but they just want this and want that and are not happy. They're disgruntled and they want it now. But that's not the way it works all the time, right? I'll give you a perfect example. Here's a great example of that. Let's take Pastor Cheryl, right? Pastor Cheryl was at death's door, seriously at death's door. And I believe we were just talking about this morning. Had it not been, really, this was the Lord's divine hand, had it not been for Dr. Meads, who is a strong Messianic believer and happened to be her naturopath, when she went to visit him and he examined her, it wasn't just his naturopathic skills, it was his spirit that said, she needs help. And I was telling her this morning, I says, it wasn't just like she needed help to be healed. She needed help because she's a servant of God, and I need to drop everything to do what I need to do to keep her alive and to get her healed. That's what Dr. Meads did. He was a strong believer. So once he was all in, he was the guy that was on the phone and talking to her oncologist and says, you drop everything for her. You do it right now or I'm coming over there. Got a servant of the Lord who's on death's door. Let's get it done. That's what saved Cheryl. Two people, two believers, right place at the right time, and everything kind of came together. We needed a lot of money at the time, we needed a lot of chemo, but everything came together because the team was all in. The team was all in for it. Now we look back, we look down the road, 2 or 3 years later, Cheryl is still dealing with some of the side effects of some of this chemotherapy right now. And, she is not by any means cured of cancer. She is not cured of cancer right now. She is I would say, she likes to use the phrase, I don't like to use it, but she believes that she's in palliative care. You know what that is? That's care for a certain period of time, 5 to 7 years. But they haven't told her that she would ever be cured of this. That's Pastor Cheryl's situation. And actually, as the days and months go by, she's losing a little bit each week. Each month she's getting a little bit weaker, and it's just the result. This is a really difficult cancer. It's very rare. So she's hanging in there. We were doing some work this week. We were we were schlepping this week, so we're moving a lot of stuff around this week. And I remember when I first met Cheryl, she would have no problem doing this for 8, 9 hours. She could probably barely go 2 or 3 at the most. I was working with her. So she's not the same. Go ahead.
I just want to say that, you know, when you first met us, Grandma always mentioned about me, because I was going through healing as well, because I had cancer too.
Yeah. There we go, right? So God's going to do what he needs to do for us individually, and I do believe that it is absolutely a measure and a test of our faith. And that's the key part of this. It's the key part of this. I'm going to talk more about that later on today. So we'll continue on. There's still, I think we're going to pick it up from this because there's some more. I've got 3 or 4 more pages on this exact healing that we're going to pick up. We only touched on a few of them, but there's more. There's more in this unique particular event. So be blessed, and we'll continue on next week. Shabbat shalom.